In this video, I'm going to be philosophizing on the lost secret ingredient within existentialism as it pertains to the will. The will is most meaningful in terms of what one wills into existence, concerned with the creation of values willfully. Most meaningful writing within the central existentializings of the existentialists concerned some possible probabilistic future-oriented desire to creation one's values by will, not necessarily meaningful in terms of its meaningful similarities to freedom and or death and or meaning and or agency, be it that one's will is not necessarily the distinct conducts one engages in terms of shaping one's will and or meaning and or actualizing certain inner meanings from the existentia of those prior existing conducts one conducts, yet uniquely originates within one's direct perception and much the same as one's self-knowledge and or self-awareness. Compared to agency, one does not hold the same self-knowledge and or self-awareness, coming instead to learn of what agency is compared to the will one assumes often from one's earliest existence, the intrinsic meaningfulness of one's will existing innately as some more well-established truth within one's existentia, meaning that be it one holds the awareness one is conscious and holds the self-knowledge and or self-awareness, consciousness is an awareness by its definition, and that this awareness is non-arbitrary, that is, it's meaningful, and we treat it to be meaningful in terms of compassion and compassionate acts, not necessarily empathy, yet the inference that an individual experiencing certain pangs from deprivations of the essential underlying psychological needs, more complex than animals, we are more concerned with satisfying certain underlying psychological needs compassionately, inferring, never necessarily holding the self-knowledge and or self-awareness another individual has a consciousness, yet infer it from our own unique morality. Other mere animals do not communicate, and yet individuals who get upset when we violate another's individual autonomy, held to what we have well established is the basis for human rights and or freedoms, concerning what derives within distinct free agents distinct moral concerns. Had you been in a philosophy class and or even a law class, you may confront certain questions engaging certain feelings of fairness and or justice and or upset you perceiving certain injustices and or unfairness concerning one's unique morality derived from one's meaningful experiences one may come to recognize distinctions in terms of perspective, truly only able to originate within a conscious, direct perception, to infer some awareness in relation to information processing, not necessarily the entire complexities of the awareness, yet to be able to infer certain distinct information processing, not the same as one's own, unique to what subjectivity means, as a must be good enough and necessarily necessary conditions, originate within the awareness monitoring certain internal and or external conditions in relation to information processing, to engage willful calibrations within what is expected of an individual to engage in concerning learning, and or had one being tested and or one expected to study would have to engage in some sort of ingestion within consciousness to perceive information processes, to code into meaningful memories what one may more easier access and or evaluate knowledge subsequent to the meaningful communications, provided certain meaningful similarities within the direct perception of distinct sets of meaningful information, written in terms of the test questions. One responds to more objective codifications written, not necessarily to mean that the questions themselves are objective per se, yet the codifications to what the correct spelling and or syntax underlying the appropriate validations of certain test questions meaningful to test an individual's domain-specific self-knowledge and or self-awareness within distinct self-disciplines and or subject matter, meaningful to communicate what one thinks, to respond more earnestly one's own meaningful thoughts, engaging the volitions to willfully communicate the articulations unique to the self, most meaningful to bring into existência dentro umas vontade, o apossoso, allowancing for more deeper inferences into the depths of an individual's subjectivity, processing more complex, meaningful utterances of thought within one's being, having had to be ingested within one's volitional communications, to be receptive to the information and or to connect that to deliberate judgments as one judges whether or not one should will forward the appropriate response and or treat the communications as trivial and not necessarily ever quite respond to the question and or provide complete sentences, be it one is expected to respond and yet does not want to bother or nor knows what to do, and so scratches at the paper with the pen, meaning that the most meaningful communications are willful, not necessarily done without connecting it to some conduct one is conducting, not necessarily within the deliberate conscious processing of one's direct perception causations, yet may engage certain prior existing causations of direct perception to the automaticity of engaging more agency in terms of some direction of conduct without necessarily internalizing the prior existing will and or desires of one's will, most meaningful to willful endeavors, distinct from the concerns for freedom, meaning, death, agency, and or values the existentialists had been more concerned with, be it that values tend to also not necessarily be thought of as much, yet more meaningfully tend to be related to one's will, as to truly only value something within judging whether or not it's meaningful and or whether or not one thinks it to be valuable and or holds it worthwhile to maintenance the meanings within the valued conduct and or valued direct perceptions certain values truly only hold in existentia. For example, honesty and or love of learning and or self-disciplining one's mind to deliberate and or think more responsible thoughts and or conduct the self within a future-oriented direction, to think from more component parts and or processes the more meaningful, practical, step-by-step conducts meaningful for arriving at one's desired destination, more dedicated to certain commitments. Not necessarily some response to what has happened to you and or shaping your internal and or external environment without the willful, conscious, prior existing thoughts meaningful to engage certain more agentic conducts, yet is more like the blind watchmaker whom is attempting to bring into creation some original technology and or tool, be it that a watch is more complex than a mere tool and or distinct technology, and tends to incorporate both intrinsic processes and or intrinsic properties, meaning one may use a watch as a tool to conduct certain desired byproducts and or residuals and or derivatives, drawing value intrinsic from the tool's multifunctionalities, be it one may be able to time certain events and or be more punctual with a watch and or provide different predictions for certain events one may experientially encounter throughout distinct days, yet not necessarily hold self-knowledge and or self-awareness of the time until one is able to track the time with one's watch, to allow in certain abilities not necessarily existing had one not conducted one's will to evaluate one's possible future-oriented inferences into what's meaningful about certain BADAX, cause effect dynamic associação, causations one infers from certain existing priors, from certain things one may do with the watch, distinct from the technology providing certain more descriptive and or explanatory information processing that allows us to sort certain more modular multi-functions, not necessarily certain creative abilities one may conduct in relation to the watch, allowance from the tool's multi-functions. Meaningful to engage creative problem solving and or explorations within the originality more unique to the will, yet is meaningfully related to all the existential pillars, be it one is more concerned with certain meanings within one's existencia, within the finitude of one's existence, meaning that one may not truly experience the privileges one has to be a human had one ceased consciousness, truly dying, and or had one been reincarnated, may within the next life be some more aquatic amphibian, not necessarily one may have self-knowledge and or self-awareness of, perhaps within a different period altogether, and or perhaps a different planet, exploring the unknown unknowns without the same complexities of one's more valued, unique intrinsic processes and or intrinsic properties. Nor is will the same to one's freedoms. Be it the paradox of freedom is often most concerned to why the will is meaningful. This should be of concern to individuals more concerned with existential questions, as the 5 secret ingredients of existentialism are correlated yet distinct as it pertains to certain distinctions within each question to be unique, and within each pillar allowancing for more meaningful explorations into one's own phenomenology. So all I want to say for this video, hope you have an awesome episode.